Hello, my name is Scott Jarkoff, and today I am going to be providing you with a presentation on demystifying threat intelligence. Basically, going to be talking about what threat intelligence encompasses, why it's not really that difficult of a discipline to get involved in, how it can benefit your organization, and how you can leverage threat intelligence in a proactive manner in order to help defend against the very sophisticated adversaries that we are seeing around the globe today. So just a quick intro into who I am. My name is Scott Jarkoff. I am the director of the Strategic Threat Advisory Group. I cover both the APJ and EMEA regions here with CrowdStrike. For the past 30 years, I've actually lived and continue to live in Tokyo, Japan, where I am, as I mentioned, currently positioned. I originally came over here 30 years ago with the United States Navy, spent a little bit of time as a uniformed sailor before departing the Navy, but staying in Japan and staying working with the US Department of Defense. I worked as a civil servant with US DoD. So all in all, I did about 23 total years with US government, all here in Japan, completely focused on cybersecurity and intelligence primarily as a consumer of intelligence, not so much as a producer or an analyst. And then in 2013, I decided I had enough of the government side of the house and decided to switch things up a little bit. I moved over to industry and worked with McAfee for about 6 years. And then in 2013, I'm sorry, and then in 2018, I guess it was, end of 2018, beginning of 2019, I signed on with CrowdStrike, and I've been with CrowdStrike for about 2 years now, give or take. Again, focusing on intelligence here with CrowdStrike and kind of lead our intelligence businesses for both of those regions. So that's a little bit about me. This is the agenda that we're going to go over with for this session today. Just as a reminder, please do make sure you use the Q&A section for asking questions. The chat box should allow you to enter questions, and then we will go ahead and address those once we finish the actual presentation itself. So let's start out with why threat intelligence matters. And let's start here with just taking a quick view on what's transpired over the course of the last 7 quarters. So as you can see, we're taking a look from 2019 Q1 all the way up through 2020 Q3. And you can basically see at the very bottom, nation state has essentially stayed fairly consistent. No major increases or decreases in that nation state activity. Contrast that to the ECRIME activity. It has exploded. ECRIME in particular in 2020 has just gone off the rails. If we compare the amount of ECRIME activity that CrowdStrike observed in 2019 versus what we have observed thus far in 2020, so the first 3 quarters, 330% increase in the amount of ECRIME that has taken place this year versus last. So it's unbelievable. And we can attribute this to probably 2 main reasons. Number one, COVID-19 has given the threat actors a wonderful new lure that they can use in their activities. People are starving for COVID-19 information, and the theme of COVID-19 in, say, a phishing scam or in a fraudulent website is just very easy to use to trick people into doing things that they otherwise normally would not do. That, and then also ransomware. Ransomware is just breeding more ransomware because as people fall victim and as people end up paying the ransom, it's just motivating and encouraging other ECRIME threat actors to engage in that same activity. And the lack of security controls to properly prevent ransomware from being successful is just far too prevalent today. So that's the 2 main reasons for that huge increase in ECRIME. So this, I think, is a very interesting view on what we essentially see here in the security industry today. I think Einstein was onto something, and this quote really, kind of speaks to that. And what I mean by that is essentially what we see happening in the industry is completely opposite of what Einstein is doing, or what Einstein was mentioning rather in that quote. We in this industry, we see a lot of very expensive solutions that are available, very complex solutions, and customers end up purchasing these solutions without really understanding what problem it is that they're trying to solve. Also, they're just reacting to threats. People just react to a threat. You see an alert. What do I do? React without really understanding what's going on behind it, like not really getting the context behind why that alert has been generated, right? Or the origin of what really took place. And then after these things happen and our organizations are hit and ultimately compromised, then we kind of just sit there wondering, as we're beaten and battered, kind of wondering, why did we once again fall victim to this kind of activity when we had spent all this money on this very complex security solution that should have prevented this from happening? So this is where threat intelligence plays a huge role, especially in the role of understanding the relationship between us and the adversary. Why does that adversary have their sights set on us? Why are they targeting our organization? What is it that we have? What is it that we have done that is causing that adversary to focus on us? Is it because we have valuable intellectual property? Is it because we look like, or the threat actors maybe have identified some vulnerabilities that could potentially lead to major ransomware payouts? Or maybe, there's a particular stance that our company has taken on some topic, and now, hacktivists disagree with this, ideological stance that we've taken and now want to attack us because of it. So understanding these relationships is key, and this is where threat intelligence plays a huge role. But what are the components of threat intelligence? What are these core components? Well, let's first start out by talking about conflict, because the outcome of these conflicts are ultimately determined by these core components. And let's start like with an analogy, right? So, when we talk about conflict, there's, a number of different types of conflict. And let's start out with like the mind, right? So thinking about the mind, this is all about when you execute, or rather when you have the best strategy and the best understanding of your opponent or the adversary. Maybe you also have the best, strategy to combat whatever the opponent is, in your understanding, whatever the opponent is intending to leverage. You also have the body, which is being best prepared and best equipped for battle. Being strong, being resilient, being able to take that blow, if you will. And then you have action. This is ultimately, when you're on the battlefield and you're conducting that attack, having the best execution of that attack, or potentially having the best execution of defenses against a particular attack. Now let's extrapolate that out to kind of an analogy and say, like, mind is, kind of maps to sports, right? This is like a basketball game where whichever team has the best strategy and the best understanding of their opponent should be the victor in that sporting match. And then maybe body is like a boxing match. It's like or maybe UFC if you're into, the a little more hardcore, kind of fighting type of sports. But at the end of the day, it's about being the most equipped and the most prepared, right? Being able to take those blows from your opponent, but keep attacking and keep defending. Or action, it kind of maps to a battle, like maybe a wartime situation or a battlefield situation, where if you are executing your plan to the maximum extent possible and better than your opponent, then you should ultimately be victorious in that fight. So let's apply this concept to threat intelligence. And before I continue, just a reminder, please, if you have questions, make sure to use the chat box to ask those questions. So now let's apply this concept to threat intelligence, right? So we have ourselves, we have the adversary, and then we basically map mind, body, and action to the strategic, operational, and tactical layers of threat intelligence. And at the strategic layer, this ourselves piece, it maps to our industry. What is it about our industry that makes it an attractive prospect for the attackers? Similarly, our assets. And I kind of addressed that, a couple slides back, but ultimately it is, what assets do we have that are attractive to this adversary? Is it intellectual property? Is it the fact that we have, bad, or that we have, vulnerable security systems or vulnerability endpoints, or vulnerable endpoints that the threat actors could leverage, say for ransomware, any number of things, but it's all about attractive industry and attractive assets. On the adversary side, it's about that motivation and about that intent to attack. So the motivation ultimately being a nation state threat actor who's after some intellectual property, or an ECRIME threat actor who is after that financial gain, or the hacktivist who's after the idea of spreading some ideological or political message. And then intent to attack, do they actually have the capacity and the intent and the will to conduct that attack? So that's just the strategic layer. At the operational layer, it's about people, processes, and technology. So our people are potentially vulnerable, our processes are potentially vulnerable, and our technology, as we all know, is not 100% infallible. Their technology is inherently, vulnerable, and as are our processes, and we all know people are vulnerable as well. And then this maps to the threat actors' capabilities, right? How do they leverage those vulnerabilities in the people, processes, and technologies through the use of different tools? And then also the infrastructure that the threat actor leverages, that command and control infrastructure, whether it's homegrown, whether it's botnets, deployed globally, whether it's things as simple as file sharing services like Dropbox, or web-based email services like Gmail. And there's a number of infrastructures out there that are leveraged, but that's the operational layer. And then at the tactical layer, these are about like our digital assets. So like the actual endpoints themselves, the web servers that are sitting out in the DMZ. This is about physical assets. So it could be the supply chain. This is about psychological assets. So, using social engineering as a way of getting into an organization. So these are the tactical assets on our side, and that maps to the tactics, techniques, and procedures that the threat actors leverage for gaining access into, or at least identifying areas where they can gain access into our networks, and ultimately potentially compromise some machines. So what are some best practices with threat intelligence? So first, let's start with how stakeholders can benefit from threat intelligence. And we map the stakeholders similarly as we did on the previous slide to tactical, operational, and strategic stakeholders. So we'll kind of come at this from a, more like an F1 analogy here, where like the tactical maps to the mechanics, the operational maps to the driver. So say the Lewis Hamiltons of the world, the Max Verstappens of the world, the Michael Schumachers back in his heyday of the world. And then the strategic maps to the team principals or the owners. So the higher level side. So at the tactical, when we talk about this, it's really all about automation. This is about feeding intelligence into those devices that are listed there in an automated fashion. That is ultimately what it's all about. At the operational layer, it is all about making those stakeholders better at their job, empowering them with additional context, additional information to help them do their job better. So think about a SOC analyst who has access to how the threat actors conduct their attacks and the tools that they leverage and the tradecraft that they employ. This is what the operational layer is all about and the stakeholders that can benefit from it. And then at the strategic side, it's all about the C-suite, the executives, maybe some strategic intelligence stakeholders as well, but primarily it's about the board and the C-suite, more so than anything else. So best practices at the tactical layer, this is, ultimately focused on, as I mentioned, automation, and it's about enriching data that your network has already generated. So think about your networks around the globe in these environments. They generate a huge amount of data. You have firewalls, you have proxy servers, you may have intrusion detection or prevention systems, you have email gateways, you have Active Directory logs, you have router logs, you have switch logs. I mean, it goes on, and oftentimes we aggregate all of this data into a SIM, and then we hope for some correlation and hope that we can identify, some anomalous behavior. So it's all about with tactical intelligence, adding adding high fidelity indicators of compromise as an example into this SIM, and enriching that data and highlighting activity that you may not be aware of. This has to happen in an automated fashion. This is not something that can be just uploaded by an analyst, because it really ultimately takes away from the speed. It needs to be able to reduce the amount of time to conduct that enrichment. So speeding up investigation and effort, speeding up the amount of time that we take. And then it has to be optimized for our defenses and for our operations. So the integration needs to be simple and easy and not require a huge amount of resources. So here's an example. The thing that we often run into are organizations that are focused on singular threats. So ransomware is the key of the day, and organizations are often focused only on ransomware, and they're using their detection capabilities specifically to highlight ransomware. Well, if you leverage intelligence in a tactical fashion, you'll understand that ransomware attacks are more than just ransomware. There's an attack sequence to be aware of, and understanding that broad perspective on how ransomware is deployed is extremely important in being able to effectively combat it. So what I mean by that, practical example, you have a malware downloader such as Emotet, which is then used to deploy the banking Trojan such as TrickBot, which is then used to deploy the actual ransomware such as Ryuk. This is the standard attack sequence that we see for ransomware, and leveraging high fidelity indicators of compromise, for example, that focus not just on the ransomware, but on the entire attack sequence, can help you identify this attack in much more rapid fashion than if you were just singularly focused on the ransomware. Again, quick reminder, please use your chat box to ask questions. I will be more than happy to address questions at the end of the session, but I can't address them if you don't ask them. So please make sure to use that chat box. So moving on, operational. Operational is about what we say in the government side of the house, or in particular on the military side of the house. It's about having a common operational picture. So this is about having like a single pane of glass that depicts a common overview of the environment, not just for me, but across multiple teams. This could be across the operations center, across the vulnerability management team, across the incident responders, but it's a common view. And the goal is to make sure that it allows and empowers the stakeholders at the operational level to be better at their job, right? This is all about empowerment. And it's all about demonstrating, or rather, it's all about showing information that will help those stakeholders be proactive, right? This is about, for example, helping the SOC be able to address those emerging threats and be aware of them in a proactive fashion, not a reactive fashion. So here's an example of this where, generally speaking, adversaries look for like the easiest path, right? The path of least resistance. They favor that, and they also favor, low risk and opportunistic attacks. So Here's some examples on the right-hand side, spear phishing, about how ransomware is evolving, and it's actually evolved into ransomware as a service, about how threat actors are using things like living off the land techniques when they conduct their attacks. So if you're not familiar with living off the land techniques, this is a technique where threat actors are using native operating system binaries that exist on the systems they've compromised, or using legitimate third-party tools on those systems, or even pulling down third-party tools that are legitimate and using those in their nefarious activities, or understanding remote work. Just being able to provide this kind of intelligence to, say, for example, a SOC or incident responders helps them have a better understanding of what to look for. So doing things like campaign tracking, tracking the different campaigns by ECRIME threat actors, by nation state threat actors that are potentially targeting your organization, as well as understanding the threat actors themselves. So profiling them, kind of collate dossiers, if you will, on the different threat actors, on the tradecraft that they employ, on the tools that they use, and understand every facet of these adversaries, so that way you know what to look for and are aware of their capabilities before an attack happens. This is all about being proactive, having that better understanding of them before an attack occurs, so that way you are cognizant of what to look for. And now let's talk about best practices at the strategic layer. So, this is at the end of the day all about better decision making, really. That's ultimately what we're talking about. And if we have a strategic view of the landscape from a threat intelligence perspective, this allows us to understand what we need to be prepared for, which at the end of the day allows us to make better budgetary decisions. So what new security technologies do we need to invest in, or what new technologies period do we need to invest in? And then how do we go about planning for the future, organizing the training sessions and organizing our troops together? How do we equip them and prepare the entire organization to counter these threats? How do we create awareness campaigns that help our user community better be informed on what to expect from the adversaries? So at the end of the day, the strategic layer is all about decision making, being informed enough to make better decisions that will help with the risk mitigation for the organization. So here's a practical example of that. This is, a chart that essentially ranks the different threat actors out there in terms of capability and intention. And you can kind of see the big four: Russia, DPRK, China, and Iran on the right-hand side, upper right-hand side of this. And so as one example, we can see that China moves up in intent. And what's the reason for this change in intent? Well, it's because, of some posturing. It's because of the COVID-19 blame game that's been going around. And maybe it's about some military positioning. But the key here is that we now understand this, and we can understand, why they have made this change, and then extrapolate that out to those decisions that we need to be making as an organization moving forward. How about the criminals? They move to the right in capability and a little bit up in intent, right? So they're gaining capabilities and increasing intent. And why? Well, ransomware is becoming far more advanced. They are getting much better at their ability to penetrate an organization. And in some cases, there are criminal and nation state collaboration taking place, where the e-crime threat actors are essentially acting as proxies on behalf of the nation states. So understanding that will also help you understand what decisions may need to be made in an organization. So how do we get started with threat intelligence? Well, the first thing is taking a look at some use cases and seeing really what is the most relevant to you. And we've kind of mapped these to tactical, operational, and strategic. The further you move to the right, and up that arrow, the further you get into operational and strategic use cases, right? And or capabilities from the intel perspective. The more you move to the right, the more sophisticated we're talking about, right? On the left-hand side, for example, the difficulty level is really what that arrow is all about. And threat feeds are really, it's all about automation like we talked about, and that's not really that difficult. It's very easy to plug in threat feeds. But if you're interested in doing campaign tracking, as I talked about, like at the operational level, or strategic intelligence reporting, then that's where we start getting into far more sophisticated capabilities. So you need to really, as an organization, sit down and think, what are your actual use cases? What do you want to be able to do? So again, reminder, please use that chat box to ask questions. I'm positive that we've gone over, quite a bit of content so far, and I'm positive there is a question or three out there. So please ask away. Use that chat box. It's important. I'm more than happy to address questions at the conclusion of our presentation here. So with that, survival of the fastest, right? This is a situation where speed is of the essence. And so breakout time, this is a term that CrowdStrike uses to denote the amount of time that it takes a threat actor to conduct that first lateral movement once they've penetrated that first endpoint in a network. And so that can occur anywhere between 2 to 5 hours. There are some threat actors that are actually as quick as 20 minutes, but it's about, being aware that that's the breakout time, and you need to be able to catch the threat actor before breakout time, because if you do, then you're able to prevent those major components of the MITRE attack phrase from taking place. Lateral movement, catching threat actors before, prior to lateral movement is key in preventing and stopping breaches. And then something else that we are also very keen on is, providing you with some metrics, right? Or, at least some ideas on how you can kind of quantify your detection and response capabilities. And this is, in the form of what we call the 1-10-60 rule, where we basically are trying to get you to buy into being able to detect an event, a malicious event, in 1 minute, or at least detect an event within 1 minute, investigate this in event within 10 minutes, and ascertain whether or not it is in fact malicious. If it is malicious, then respond within 60 minutes, respond by mitigating it, and getting the threat actors off the network in 60 minutes. That is key. 1-10-60. If you can meet the 1-10-60 rule, then you are able to prevent breaches. This will help you be the best at what you can be. This is absolutely achievable. I know a lot of you in the audience are probably shaking your head going, no way, like, how do I achieve this? It's impossible. We just have, far too resources, or we don't have the right technologies, or the threat actors are just too sophisticated. I assure you, you can match this rule. It is absolutely doable. And the key is that investigation piece. If you can investigate in 10 minutes and ascertain whether or not there's malicious activity on your network within 10 minutes, then you're on the key and on the path to success. And this is all about automation, right? So if you think about an alert and conducting file analysis and deciphering the results and all that could take days if you do this in a manual fashion. It's a very time-consuming analysis, very tedious, very arduous, and you want to decrease that through automation. So something to think about is that in January 2018, Gartner basically came out and said by 2021, which is rapidly approaching, endpoint protection platform systems will provide automated, orchestrated incident investigation and breach response. So think about that. And that going back to that 1-10-60 rule, this is the key here, right? So Falcon X is an intelligence automation workflow. It's our threat intelligence capability, and it is, at the end of the day, it's all about automation for certain components. So if we go back to the slide with the arrow and the use cases, some of those automation use cases on the left-hand side of that slide were key with this automation workflow. But really it's about doing things like automating delivery of samples to a sandbox for automated detonation. It's about being able to conduct searches for malware to ascertain whether or not that sample that you're looking at is related to a targeted attack or part of a broader campaign, and then using intelligence to understand the context behind an attack. And automation within all of this is key. Also, threat intelligence is not designed to be pigeonholed into just an intelligence team or just the security operations center or just one aspect of an organization. It should be used holistically. Security operations center, for example, quite obviously can ascertain or extract value from threat intelligence, as can incident response. That's kind of like the no-brainer side of the house. But risk management can extract value through the strategic intelligence reports. C-suite can use briefings from intelligence analysts to better understand what is happening at the strategic layer and in the industry. You can use intelligence reports to understand the threat actor activity out there and use that to provide user awareness training. One of my favorite ones is talking about vulnerability management, because people often overlook how vulnerability management teams can benefit from intelligence. By understanding the threat actors that are targeting your organization, and by understanding the different vulnerabilities those threat actors focus on for exploitation, this can help your vulnerability management team properly prioritize the security patches that they need to install, because they are aware of the greatest threats to the organization and can then patch those before they need to patch any of the others. Because if you know a threat actor is targeting CVE, XYZ, and that threat actor is also going to be targeting your organization or has a history of targeting organizations in your industry, then you want to get that passed as quick as possible. You do not want to give the adversary time to exploit that vulnerability. So this is a great way for the vulnerability management team to help prioritize patching. So what's the way ahead? Well, again, we're inevitably linked to the adversary. That relationship is always there. They have we have something that they want, whether that's the intellectual property, whether that's deploying ransomware, whatever the case may be. We are linked through a number of ways, and we need to be able to understand that and leverage our knowledge of what the adversary is after and the capabilities of the adversary, and use that to our advantage. So let's briefly talk about some solutions. We offer solutions at the tactical, operational, and strategic layer. API intelligence, or rather intelligence feeds that come in via API. Very, very easy to use at the tactical layer. Yara and snort rules that you can use with your threat hunting tools and or with your IDS IPSs, but it has to be all about real-time IOC feeds. That's the key at tactical layer. At the operational layer, it's about understanding the adversary profiles, about being able to do malware searches, about having access to intelligence reporting, doing analysis with sandboxes, etc. And then at the strategic layer, it's really about those sector-specific or industry-specific reports, understanding the adversary campaigns that they undertake, and then maybe potentially, conducting custom intelligence with a intelligence provider like CrowdStrike. Just briefly, these are the Falcon X capabilities. So they come in basically 4 tiers. The higher you go in the tier, the more context and the more analysis that CrowdStrike is able to provide. The standard tier is everything in that gray box, and the premium tier is everything in both the standard gray box and the premium blue box. And those are the UI components of Falcon X. Elite is an add-on to Premium, which provides you with an analyst, and then Dedicated is the same as Elite, just with a dedicated analyst as opposed to a shared resource. So a lot of ability to leverage analyst expertise, and these are analysts who have worked for intelligence agencies around the globe, but then also a number of great UI-based tools that you can use in a web browser or integrate via the API. At the end of the day, the threat adversaries are after you because you have something that they want. Again, whether that's intellectual property, whether that's some kind of financial benefit, or whether that is, spreading some kind of political or ideological message. If you have any questions, again, use that chat box to ask the questions, and I'm more than happy to address those here in just a moment when I finish up. But if afterwards you think of a question that you need answered, by all means, please reach out and get in touch with us. More than happy to answer any questions about threat intelligence. With that, thank you so very much for your time. I hope you found this a valuable session and a valuable use of your time. I look forward to addressing any of the questions that have shown up in the chat box, which I haven't taken a look at yet, but I will here in just a moment. And now is the time. Please, while I'm here, leverage the opportunity to ask questions, and I will address them to the maximum extent that I can. But thank you again for your time, and I hope you found this valuable. Thank you.